Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and let's make a quilt where all of the components inside the quilt do not start as squares. Let's make it out of diamonds. And to make a diamond, we're going to need a hexagon and 2 triangles. And here's an example of a quilt that consists of that shape. You have your diamond shapes, and that diamond consists of a hexagon with 2 points. It looks complicated, but it's very easy to sew. This particular one is an I Spy quilt. It was one that I started and made a long time ago. I started by collecting different pictures off of my friends and going through all of my fabric until I had enough to make this entire quilt. And in this case, I needed 67 pictures, and I wanted all of the pictures different. So it took me a while to collect them. I'm going to do the same thing, but it's not going to be so big, and I'm going to make it an alphabet quilt. This is an older panel from Elizabeth's studio. I don't know that it's available anymore, but what's nice about it is each letter has an animal representing the letter. So I'm going to make an alphabet quilt, and I'm going to cut each one of these little blocks into hexagons. So the first thing you need to do is get a hexagon that's going to fit your pictures. I have a set of 8 different sizes, so I just chose one that is going to be the best fit. And in this case, it was a 2.5-inch template. And I was able to take them all and make sure that they fit. So finding the right hexagon shape is really the first part of making this quilt. So it depends on the blocks that you want to cut out. You're going to have to find a hexagon that's going to fit. So the size hexagon I'm going to be using is a 2.5-inch, which means each of these sides is measured at 2.5 inches. Then you have the seam allowance inside. With that, I'm going to need a triangle, and that triangle is going to go on both sides. So that hexagon with those triangles is going to turn into that diamond shape. You can figure out what size triangles you're going to need on each side by just continuing those lines, and that gives you 2 triangles. With that triangle, you're going to need a seam allowance going from this seam allowance, so it's going to come here. Because when the triangle is put on top of that hexagon, that is your seam that you're going to sew. And in this case, each of my edges are 2.5 inches, which means my triangle also, all 3 sides, are 2.5 inches. So this is just a good way of trying to figure out what size you are going to want. And sometimes just having the template drawn really just helps visualize things better. When you do sew that triangle on, you have these little dog ears, and they're going to be at 1/4 inch. And if you do have one of these rulers, you can either trace around the ruler and cut it out, or use a nice small rotary cutter. Keep in mind you want to keep the picture within that seam allowance. So I have the 26 with the alphabet, but the quilt is going to need 28 hexagons for the body. So I have 2 additional little animal prints that I was able to find in my stash. And for the sides, I'm going to need 15 more hexagons. And these are going to do both the sides and the top and the bottom. So now we need triangles to go on each side. We're going to need a total of 79 of these little triangles. So depending on the size of the triangle that you need for the hexagon that you're going to use, you need to cut a strip that is going to be the size of that triangle. Then you can take that triangle and continue to cut. And you're going to be able to turn that triangle on that strip and cut that entire strip out and get all of those triangles. And I was able to get 23 of these triangles from 1 strip of fabric. The triangles need to be stitched right on 2 opposite ends. And if you're following a picture, it's going to go right on the end so the picture lines up straight. So both of these triangles are going to have to be stitched on 1/4 inch down this area. And that is where that 1/4 inch seam allowance is going to come in. However, I like to cut off of these ears first for a couple of reasons. Number one, it helps me line up this so that the edges are right, and I don't have to cut them off after. You can cut out this triangle size because you're going to use it to help you square off these corners. I will take this triangle once it's cut out and I put it right on the back side of my ruler. I line up my 1/4 inch seam allowances and I tape that triangle on the back of my hexagon ruler, and I make sure that those edges are trimmed off so it's actually in that position. I'm going to use this to cut off all of the dog ears off my triangles and put that triangle right over top, and I'm able to see it. And I'm going to do this to all of my triangles. Now when I go to line up those triangles, and they're going to match perfect, you won't have to worry about making sure you have a 1/4 inch on each side. I'm going to be able to take that now and stitch a 1/4 inch down both sides. Now when I go to press this, I have no dog ears, and that is going to line up and make that perfect diamond shape. There is another way that you can make this block and you can trim it down. You're going to start with the same size hexagon, and instead of using triangles the exact size, you can make the triangles bigger. And you're going to sew those triangles on both sides using the 1/4 inch, and you won't have to worry about cutting off those dog ear ends. When the oversized ends have been sewn on, you're going to be able to trim this block down, and you're going to trim following the edges along that hexagon. So I can take my ruler, line it right up along this edge, and trim off that point. I now have one straight edge, and you're going to be able to continue to trim off this triangle by following the straight line of that hexagon. You can do all 4 corners. You now have that perfect diamond shape. That hexagon block is going to remain the same, and your triangles are perfect. However you make them, they need to end up that perfect diamond shape. You're going to need of these center pieces with the points on both sides, 8 extras with the points on both sides. These are going to be the sides that go around. You're also going to need 7 hexagons and only with one side on. And to lay it out, it's going to be very easy. And because I'm doing the alphabet, I'm going to keep them in order. But the first one is going to be a filler. So I have a filler A, B, and C. The next row is going to fill in these spaces. So D is going to fill the one space, E, and F. My next row is going to duplicate my first row. So I have a row of 4, then a row of 3. So it's going to be able to just slide right into that next V area. So the centers of the hexagon are going to be in a row. And I'm going to continue this until I finish with all of my pieces. At the very end, I've also had to have another filler. So I have 2 fillers because I happen to be using the alphabet and I need that many blocks. You can already see the shape that is starting to take place. The hexagons with the one point on them are going to fill in the top and the bottom. So we're just going to be able to finish filling those diamond shapes. The extra 8 that are going to be the sides are going to slide right into the sides. When these are all sewn on, they're going to be cut, so we don't have to worry about them. But they're going to fill in the spaces. And this is what's going to make the quilt come into a square or a rectangle, depending on what you're making. And the rows we're going to sew are on the diagonal. That will be the first row. If you pull the second row away, you can see where that is going to be the second row. So each row is going to change in number. And to sew them together, we're going to take those and fold them and stitch down a 1/4 inch. When that seam is stitched down, you need to have a 1/4 inch hanging out on one side and the 1/4 inch on the other side. When you open up, you want those triangles to match. So this seam and that seam along the back are going to match up right at that intersection, not at this edge. On this side, I have the one seam going in one direction, and when I turn it over, the seam is going up in the other direction. This row is actually a very straight row. It is the same all the way down, except for the points on the ends. It just looks like it's not because it's going on a diagonal. So get all of your rows sewn together. Now that these long thin rows are done, we can press the seams. So you're going to do every other row opposite. So have the one row going down and this row going up. That way they're going to nestle together in the back. I like to lay them out again so that I know that I have them all in order. We just need to remember that the row is going to go through the center of this hexagon all the way across. And the second row will also go through the centers of the hexagons. When the rows have been pressed, you're going to be able to sew them in rows. Each one of these triangles is going to go along the side of that hexagon. When they're sewn together, you're going to notice that you get a star shape. So I'm going to be able to take this piece, and I know these two are going to go together, and these two are going to go together. Just flip them over, matching up those edges, and stitch down. So you're still stitching rows, they're just on the diagonal. Now you can change these rows to how many you want. In this case we have 4 in the first row. You could have 5 or 6, however many you want. The whole idea is to lay them out first and then sew them in rows on the diagonal. We need to add some corner pieces here now so that we can square it up. On each of the sides, we're going to be cutting through the center of those diamonds. We want to leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but we're going to want to cut through. But before I do, I want to determine the size of this corner. So I'll lay the ruler down, and I don't need the ruler exact. I'm only going to get an estimate for this corner. Along the top, we need to cut it, and we're going to cut right through the center of those hexagons, leaving that 1/4 inch. So I'll put my ruler right there along that edge. Now this will give me the idea of the shape that I want. If you want, you can do another hexagon and the triangle in the corner, or you can add additional fabric. And to get this measurement, I really find just using a piece of paper works best because you're going to trim it off, so you don't need an exact measurement. So I'll take a piece of paper and just make sure that I have lots of room all the way around. And that's going to be a template for me to cut out of this fabric. And I know the same is going to go on the other side. The triangle is just going to be in this direction. When those pieces are on in the corner, we can trim it down. We need to leave a 1/4 inch from these inside measurements. That way we're not going to cut into this hexagon. So we need to do that along the sides and along the top. So where this point is, we need to come out a 1/4 inch. So here's that top trimmed off, and this is how the sides are going to look, and the bottom. I'm going to finish it off by adding a big 5-inch border. The quilt is about 30 inches by 48 inches. So any fabric can be used. You can even switch up the lights and the dark. Where you have those little triangles, you could put them in light points and have a dark background. You would still see that star, but it would look totally different. It's a fun quilt to make because you can cut up and fussy cut some many different shapes. You can make it as big as you want, and you can make it as small as you want. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.